Hey, what is up guys, and welcome to an in-depth review on Assassin's Creed Odyssey, a game that ends up being a massive success for the series, as well as an awesome change of pace, making my return after almost 7 years away from the franchise feel truly worth it. This is no longer a series that's okay with doing the same thing year after year. Rather, with this latest installment, it genuinely feels like the devs saw the bar some of the best in the industry had set, and then aimed to match it. But what exactly is it that sets Odyssey apart from previous Assassin's Creed titles? What about this experience makes it so special? Well, to answer those questions, let's start by diving into the visuals. So there are a lot of good-looking game worlds out there, but AC Odyssey definitely has one of the most gorgeous natural landscapes I've ever seen. Set in ancient Greece, the entire map feels beautifully crafted. It's one of those worlds where you could go sightseeing for countless hours and continue to come across new and interesting locations. Just about every single island, and there are a ton of them, feels vastly different from the last. Throughout your journeys, you'll get to explore all manner of environments, ranging anywhere from dry deserts to lush, exotic beaches. It's one of those maps that is absolutely enormous, leading to some awesome vistas thanks to the game's excellent draw distance. And while each landmass feels quite different from each other, there's a common element shared amongst all the environments that makes this world feel truly special. And that is the difference in elevation. You're able to climb mountains so tall you can look out and see for miles, or ride through canyons so deep that they're completely engulfed in the shadows of the tall, rocky cliffs that surround them. And that sheer level of variation helps this world feel, one, very enticing, but also two, very believable at the same time. You know, even in many fantasy titles out there, the world can end up feeling quite flat, when in reality it shouldn't be. But this one definitely does a nice job at taking that difference in elevation to a whole new level. No pun intended. The different towns and cities were also really well put together. And just like the natural environments, there's a nice amount of variation here too, allowing each place to stand out and feel unique. You've got your smaller coastal towns like Sami that can feel very close-knit and homey. And then there's absolutely massive cities like Athens that are a bit more foreboding and actually pretty easy to get lost in. You'll notice that with the different towns, there's also a certain busyness to them that once again adds to the overall believability. There's usually a reasonable amount of people walking around, some of which you'll even catch taking part in various activities, like a fist fight or a very old-fashioned jam session. It helps keep NPCs from just looking like a bunch of mindless zombies moping around. Though I did run into one bug, where out of nowhere, this gigantic horde of people spawned into this little woodland village I was riding through. It was almost as if the entire population of Sparta had come to pay the place a visit. But anyways, another aspect that's really well done is the blending of nature with man-made structures. In cities like Argos and Corinthia, for example, you have a ton of greenery that's actually incorporated amongst all of the architecture. It really gives the place a nice contrast to towns you might see in other games that just feel like different shades of gray. And on the flip side of that, when you're out in the wild, you'll also run into a ton of awesome man-made set pieces intertwined within the environment to help break up the monotony of all the greenery, in the form of things such as giant statues.
I should probably not climb on this.
Apart from the big stuff, there's also a large number of creative smaller assets as well. Take this shark boat for instance. This could have easily been some plain old wooden raft, but instead, they took that extra step to make it feel truly special. And I think that idea of little details that go a long way is something you can see across the entire game. They also have tiny details like footsteps showing up in the sand, and pools of blood that pour out around enemies you kill in the water. This is definitely one of those games where it feels like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The different animations, for instance, play a huge role in bringing this experience to life. The waves, for starters, are some of the most realistic ones I've ever seen. I love how they actually come all the way to shore, and the way in which your character sort of shakes him or herself off after they get out of the water. The way the NPC faces move is another feature that was exceptionally well done, especially with regards to the eyes. They felt strangely lifelike and were oftentimes very expressive or telling, if you will. and an awesome job with the overall appearances of the NPCs as well. You know, with a game like this that has so many different characters, it is rather difficult to make sure that every single one that you talk to feels unique. But they did an excellent job at making sure characters each had their own fair share of defining features, such as scars or missing teeth, to help set them apart from everyone else. And then affecting pretty much everything we've talked about so far is the color palette, the atmosphere, and the lighting, all of which play a huge role in tying this whole experience together. The color palette, for one, allows each area to better stand out and really pop, thanks to its bright and extremely vivid nature. And then, because of elements like the atmosphere and the lighting, I gotta say this is one of the very few games where I actually liked playing at night just as much as I did during the day. The moonlight shining down over the landscape with the stars up above can make for some downright breathtaking moments. Overall, one of the better looking games I've played all year. And with that said, let's move on to the gameplay. Assassin's Creed Odyssey adds a multitude of new innovations to the gameplay side of things that help set it apart from other games as well as previous AC titles. Now, whether those changes are for better or for worse is gonna be up to you, because truth be told, this no longer feels like an Assassin's Creed game, or at least not in the classic sense. It honestly feels like something on a much grander scale. You're no longer just an assassin. In fact, in Odyssey, you're not much of an assassin at all, but rather a mercenary who often finds him or herself in some fairly large-scale battles, where you try to single out and take down enemy commanders, leading to some really cool personal moments amidst all the chaos. And combat in Odyssey is actually a huge improvement over previous games in the series. This time around, it's far more skill-based, as you're no longer able to one-shot enemies, aside from when you're sneaking around and catch someone off guard. So even small skirmishes can be extremely challenging at times. That said, it's also not without its flaws. This is a very weightless and occasionally clunky combat system, with enemies that can sometimes feel like sword sponges. So it is somewhat gamey in that sense, though I will say it does get a lot better as time goes on, as you start to learn new moves via the game's skill tree, such as the ability to rip an enemy's shield out of their hands, or Spartan kick someone off the edge of a cliff. These sorts of things can lead to some really cool gameplay moments, and you can pretty much get as creative as you want with regards to how you approach each situation. Additionally, there are a ton of awesome finishers and assassinations that even change depending on circumstances such as whether or not you're on the run or near a wall. Though I will admit, that level of intricacy with regards to the offensive side of things does leave you guessing as to why there's only one parry animation. Oddly enough, it's basically the exact same for every single weapon, which is somewhat strange considering how detailed everything else is. So although the combat mechanics are a lot better than they have been in the past, overall they're still a bit lackluster if I'm being brutally honest. Which is a real shame because this game throws you in a ton of awesome combat scenarios, some scripted and others more spontaneous, thanks to the game's mercenary system, which is essentially Assassin's Creed's take on the Nemesis system from Shadow of Mordor. So depending on the kind of trouble you get in, people throughout the game world can put bounties on your head that these mercenaries will then try and come claim. And it can lead to some crazy situations where sometimes you'll have 3, 4, or even 5 bounty hunters on you at once. Overall, I'm a big fan of the new additions, but at the same time, this is one of those things that feels like it could have used just a little bit more ironing out, as the mercs can sometimes interrupt some of the cooler fights you have throughout the story, creating these overwhelming odds stacked against you, where your only real hope is that one of the bounty hunters hits someone on the opposing side by mistake, thus creating an all-out war. Aside from all the fighting, exploration is another one of the core gameplay loops within AC Odyssey, and it's very Bethesda-esque in the sense that you can pick one of the hidden location icons and pretty much be guaranteed to find something interesting in that direction, such as a bandit camp set in ancient ruins, or a dark, snake-infested tomb deep below ground, very similar to games like Skyrim. Now, I wouldn't say the locations themselves are done as well, simply because they don't have that same level of environmental storytelling you'd find in a BGS title, where you can really dive into the details and the history of an area. But the act of actually getting to each location is usually far more enjoyable, as traversing the world of Assassin's Creed is as good as it's ever been. Even when climbing some of the more uneven surfaces, the game feels very fluid and natural. In fact, maybe even more so than in the cities. And I think that's because most of the towns are much less densely packed together than, say, a place like Rome from Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. There are still some free-flowing moments and spots like the slums of Athens, but don't expect to be able to go from one end of the city to the other without touching the ground at some point. Of course, with the increase in map size also comes the need for other means of transportation, such as boats and horses. And I gotta hand it to him, this is probably the best horse I've ridden in a video game. It has a very nice weight to it, and a lot of cool animations that help it feel more alive. For instance, if you're riding over bumpy surfaces, the horse will make actual leaps, rather than stopping dead in its tracks, or unnaturally sliding down the surface. You can even, if you're feeling risky, take your horse off some of the more life-threatening cliffs. And if you live, there's even a cool animation for that too, where the horse sort of stumbles over with you on top of it. Apart from the death-defying stuff, they also offer a couple other handy, smaller mechanics as well, that can become really useful in sticky situations, such as the option to jump off of your horse onto nearby walls, or other obstacles in your path, or the ability to call your horse as you sprint away, allowing you to hop onto him at full speed for a quicker escape. With a ton of far-off islands scattered across the map, you also have the option of sailing from place to place. And while the game doesn't necessarily bring anything new to the table in this department, the ship-to-ship combat can be a boatload of fun. Once again, no pun intended. But as you ram or fire at enemy ships from a distance and then board them to finish off the crew, the whole process can oftentimes be quite exhilarating, especially when you find yourself on an enemy ship that's slowly falling apart or even on fire. And honestly, even just watching your ship crash through the large waves on long journeys with dolphins jumping out of the water right beside you ends up being fairly satisfying. And on a similar note, all the different wildlife actually plays a huge role in keeping the world from feeling too barren or empty. Even simply taking a dive underwater can lead to some really cool gameplay moments with creatures like vicious sharks ready to tear you limb from limb, or huge whales that seem to come out of nowhere. And gameplay-wise, this is a system with an absolute ton of depth to it, with things like genuinely gratifying quest rewards, such as unique ship parts or new weapons and armor that you can upgrade even further later on with different crafting materials that you find. Overall, not a whole lot of bugs either. I think I saw maybe one wolf fall through the map, but other than that, the only big issue I ran into were some of the sailboats not working. That and the extremely long loading screens. But all in all, a massive amount of fun from start to finish. It really is one of those experiences where you always feel like you have something meaningful to do. And now that we've got the gameplay covered, let's move on to sound.
I have my own questions for the Pythia, but this line, I'll be an old man by the time I see her.
You're joking! You carry more blades than a field of grass.
I didn't come here to start trouble.
Trouble? Just walk in! Who's going to stop you? The priest?
And to kick things off, let's start with the music. Assassin's Creed Odyssey features a beautiful accompaniment that comes with that classic AC theme, as well as several other great tracks that often have a heavy emphasis on strings, woodwinds, and percussion. And not only do they fit very well within the world of ancient Greece, but they're also each unique enough to really stand on their own, allowing each individual track to flow quite well, with different moods and story beats featured throughout your journey. The only problem is there ends up being too few for an extremely lengthy game such as this one. so you do end up hearing a fair number of repeats in places where an entirely new track may have been more appropriate. Luckily, in addition to those, there are a good number of ambient tunes that play as you explore some of the more alluring areas, really helping set the tone for a few of those eerier locations. And also feeding into the atmosphere of everything are the sounds of nature, whether it be the calling of an elk, the chirping of birds, or simply the rustling of leaves in the wind. It all sounds fantastic, and helps give you the impression that this is a world that's jam-packed full of life, even if you can't see it right in front of you. Great work with the weather, too. There's a very nice variety here. For instance, something like a light rain can end up sounding very soothing, whereas a lightning storm, on the other hand, feels far more powerful and can even intensify moments by a considerable amount. The voice acting was also tremendously well done, especially for a game like this that has so much of it. I noticed there was a certain energy to it all, which did a great job at keeping it from feeling like a chore to listen to. And that becomes particularly apparent once you get to places like Athens and start dealing with the political side of things. And they also do a great job at portraying different emotions through the use of voice as well.
They tortured me, Mistios. I tried not to break. I failed him. I failed him all these years.
It's one of those things where you could close your eyes and still be able to tell exactly how a certain character is feeling. And of course, when there isn't enough time to waste words, the sounds of battle are probably what you'll be hearing. So how did they stack up compared to the rest of the audio? Truth be told, these moments are done very well. Whether it be the sound of swords clashing or pain-induced grunts in the background, it all allows you to really immerse yourself and get a good sense of the severity of the situation at hand. And similar can be said for the naval combat. When you go crashing into an enemy ship, not only do you get to see chunks of wood flying, you also get some great audio feedback strong enough to make even Poseidon shake in his boots. Overall, fantastic sound design across the board. And now that we have that out of the way, without mentioning any spoilers, let's move on to the story and its characters. As the name states, this game is very much an odyssey, in the sense that the main quest feels like a classic story following a warrior on an epic journey. But leaving it at that would really be doing it a disservice, because this is also an adventure that features a ton of interesting twists and turns along the way. In fact, you wouldn't be wrong to call this somewhat of a mystery, as you start out as either Cassandra, or in my case Alexios, a mercenary outcast living on the small island of Kefalonia, an island on which your time there is cut short, as you're driven away to embark on an epic journey to uncover the secrets of your past and discover where you really come from. It's an adventure that I thoroughly enjoyed from start to finish, and also a tale that actually feels like several different stories packed into one. Because not only are you dealing with tracking down your family, you're also thrown into the middle of a war between Sparta and Athens, as well as tasked with unveiling and putting an end to a large group of cultists who seemingly have a hand in everything that goes on within the world. They're essentially the Illuminati of ancient Greece, and if you're looking for that classic Assassin's Creed experience, hunting down these guys is where you're going to find it. As for the main character, I actually really enjoyed playing as Alexios. I think he offers the perfect mix of stubbornness and wit as a main protagonist.
My eye. Give it to me. Give it to me and I won't kill Marcos for having you steal it! Give it to me!
You want it? Go get it.
And thanks to the new dialogue system, you're able to shape him or her, in Cassandra's case, into the character you want them to be. It's definitely more RPG-esque in that sense. And I think that's one of the main things that makes this experience truly special and genuinely stand out amongst previous Assassin's Creed titles. The new dialogue system honestly feels like the saving grace for this series, as it allows you to far better connect with your own character as well as the people around you. And perhaps just as importantly, it allows for some actual player choices to be made. Choices that really matter and have a real impact on the world and the people, and not to mention in a variety of different ways. Sometimes you'll get to see the results of your actions right then and there, and other times, choices you make won't come into effect until the very end of the game. I also adored the fact that these aren't choices that were flat out black and white. Oftentimes the decisions you'd make would fall into a much broader, morally gray area, with no clear right or wrong answer. You know, do you rescue a sick family who's about to be murdered, or leave them to their deaths in order to save others from catching the plague?
I'm sorry. I shouldn't be involved in this.
We don't have to die.
How many others will die if I free you?
You have blood on your hands.
You've acted on the gods' behalf. They'll bless you for this.
You didn't save them? What about Kina? She's my friend.
It's not that simple. You don't understand.
How do you know? I know that you didn't help anyone.
There was no right decision to make. Nobody wins.
I hope you're right.
Sometimes good people die, Phoebe. No matter how much we don't like it.
The sheer variety of different styles of quests offered throughout the world was also super satisfying. Of course, you had your more serious stuff, but the game also wasn't afraid to mix it up a bit and be a bit more lighthearted at times, even throwing in some pretty funny jokes.
I'm just a traveler, and there's more than one broken spear in the world.
And the eagle he mentioned.
What eagle?
When the game does decide to get serious though, it can actually be quite moving. I wouldn't say it necessarily does the best job at pulling at your heartstrings, but it does have a great way of giving you and your character a meaningful purpose or reason to continue pushing forward. And overall, I enjoyed how they didn't shy away from doing their own adaptations and plays on previous works, such as Romeo and Juliet, when it came to some of these quests and their decisions. It helps provide players with some more intriguing moral lessons and issues to play around with. And the same can even be said for some of the more modern issues that they bring up, which normally can get quite iffy, but what I like about the way they do it here is that it never feels like they're forcing a narrative or pushing an agenda. Instead, they lay forth a conflict and then allow you to make a decision based on what you think is right. I'm also a big fan of how even the smaller towns offer a multitude of different quests, giving you a reason to keep coming back to each area. You know, one of the big problems I always see with other games is that they usually only provide you with one quest per location or town, so it can sometimes feel like you're just bouncing around from place to place. But here, each quest will sort of tie in with others around that same area, so you really get a good sense of what each town is going through via these longer side story arcs, similar to, say, the Bloody Baron questline from The Witcher 3. What's also pretty neat is that if you play on the game's exploration mode, locations of quests and objectives aren't given to you straight up. You actually have to ask for directions for hints on where to go.
These pearls you talked about, where can I find them?
North of the clay pits, in the lagoon. They're just sitting there in the water, but there are some big sharks in there. Be careful.
And it's honestly something I wouldn't mind seeing make a bigger return, as it can be quite useful for people who enjoy playing without the HUD on, and a big old icon directing them where to go. I also like how if you do ask some of the more boneheaded or obvious questions, the game sort of pokes fun at you for doing so.
Where can I find sharks around here?
Perhaps you've heard of the ocean?
Very nice touch there. And on top of that, the game will sometimes do these clever little dialogue checks to make sure you are paying attention. Another crafty little addition that actually caught me off guard a time or two. All things considered though, my absolute favorite aspect of this game would have to be the fact that they don't shy away from dealing with the supernatural. I don't want to give too much away, but for those who enjoy more fantasy-based games, with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you actually get the chance to hunt down some of the mythical creatures from the Greek mythology, such as Medusa or the mighty Minotaur. It's definitely one of the major highlights of this experience, and to be honest, it actually feels like the combat is geared more towards facing these larger monsters. It's definitely more Witcher or even Dark Souls-esque in that regard. Now, despite the game's many steps in the right direction, there is one thing that absolutely needs to go, and that is the damn Animus. I don't know a single person who enjoys this part of Assassin's Creed, and while it helps the series put its own unique spin on things, in the end I'd say it does more harm than good. Because not only does it rip you out of the immersion, it also doesn't give you any reason to care about those real-world characters. I also gotta bring up the fact that for some reason, there are microtransactions included in this game. I'm willing to give them a partial pass on this one simply because they don't take away from the game in any way. In fact, I didn't even notice they were here until about midway through. Still, I can't help but feel a little disappointed. At the end of the day though, this is still a fantastic experience, and one that doesn't hold anything back for a potential sequel or because of those microtransactions. You, without a doubt, get your money's worth, as it took me over 70 hours just to finish the main story. And after that, I still had a ton of content left around the world for me to complete. Overall, not only has this been one of my favorite games this year, I also think it's one of the best Assassin's Creed titles out there, even if it is straying quite far at this point from its roots. And with all that said, it's time to give this game a final rating. Now this one's a bit of a tricky one because I think if it didn't have the sheer amount of quality content that it does, it would have been more of a 7 out of 10. And on the other hand, if they would have taken the time to maybe flesh out the combat system a bit more, I could have even seen it being more of a 9. But for where this game is sitting currently, it's going to be an 8 out of 10 from me. Honestly, still a great score. It's a very solid experience that's a huge improvement over previous Assassin's Creed games, and definitely one that's worth your time. Now I know this is a very busy season for games, so if you're one of those people who's maybe holding out for something like Red Dead Redemption, I still highly recommend giving this one a chance during one of the less busy parts of the year. It really is worth it. But anyways guys, that's going to wrap things up for this review, so hopefully you enjoyed the video, and as always, I will see you in the next one.